Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. I died on a Thursday afternoon, around 3:30, on the third floor of an unfinished office building in upstate New York. My heart stopped for 6 minutes while my crew tried to bring me back. And in those 6 minutes, I went somewhere that wasn't heaven or hell or the peaceful darkness that people describe when they talk about near-death experiences. I went somewhere else, somewhere that felt like the space behind reality, the place where forgotten things go to wait. And I didn't come back alone. My name is Grady. I'm 41 years old, and until 6 weeks ago, I was a construction foreman with a wife named Laura, a daughter named Becca, who just turned 12, and absolutely no history of heart problems. I exercised regularly, went for a run every morning before work, watched my diet because Laura had been worried about my cholesterol for years. I got my checkups every year like clockwork, and every year my doctor told me I was in excellent health for a man my age. There was no reason for my heart to stop that day. No warning signs, no family history, nothing to suggest that I would drop dead on a concrete floor surrounded by steel beams and power tools while my crew scrambled to save my life. But it happened anyway. And what happened after is why I'm writing this now, in the middle of the night, while my family sleeps upstairs, trying to put it into words, something that doesn't fit into words, because I need someone to understand. I need someone to know what's waiting on the other side and what can follow you back if you're unlucky enough to return. The day I died started like any other. I woke up at 5 before the alarm, the way I always did. Laura was still asleep, her hair spread across the pillow, and I watched her breathe for a few seconds before getting out of bed. We'd been married for 15 years, and I still liked watching her sleep. Still felt lucky that she had chosen me. I kissed her forehead, whispered that I loved her even though she couldn't hear me, and went downstairs to make coffee. The drive to the job site took about 40 minutes, long enough to drink my coffee and listen to the morning news. We were 3 months into construction on a new corporate headquarters, 6 stories of steel and glass rising out of what used to be farmland. The project was on schedule, on budget, and my crew was good. Experienced guys who showed up on time and did the work without cutting corners. I trusted them with my life, which turned out to be more literal than I ever expected. I was on the 3rd floor checking the progress on the electrical rough-in when it happened. The morning had been routine, nothing unusual, just the normal rhythm of a construction site. The whine of power tools, the shouts of workers coordinating their movements, the smell of sawdust and welding smoke. I was looking at a junction box and thinking about Becca's birthday party that weekend, trying to remember if Laura had ordered the cake or if I was supposed to pick it up. Normal thoughts, mundane thoughts. Then the pain hit, and everything else stopped mattering. It was like someone had reached inside my chest and squeezed my heart in their fist, a crushing pressure that drove the breath from my lungs and sent lightning bolts of agony down my left arm. My vision tunneled down to a narrow point of light, and I heard someone yelling my name from very far away. Dominic Farrow, I think, who had been working closest to me. Then I was on the ground, without any memory of falling, my cheek pressed against cold concrete, watching boots run toward me from what felt like miles away. I knew I was dying. In those last few seconds of consciousness, I knew with absolute certainty that my heart had stopped, that I was slipping away from the world, that I might never see Laura or Becca again. I wanted to fight it, wanted to hold on, but there was nothing to grab, just darkness rushing up to swallow me whole. And then, the darkness became something else. I've tried to describe the place I went to, and every time the words fall short. It wasn't dark exactly, but it wasn't light either. It was the absence of both, a grey emptiness that stretched in every direction without horizon or boundary. There was no ground beneath my feet, but I wasn't falling. There was no sky above me, but I wasn't enclosed. I just existed in that space, suspended in nothing, aware but formless. The silence was absolute. Not the silence of a quiet room, but the silence of a place where sound had never existed, where the concept of noise was foreign and unwelcome. I tried to call out, to scream, to make any noise at all, but nothing came. My voice, like my body, had been left behind. I don't know how long I floated in that emptiness. Time didn't work there, not the way it works in the world of the living. It could have been seconds or centuries. All I know is that at some point, I realized I wasn't alone. The awareness came gradually, like eyes adjusting to darkness. I began to feel something else in that emptiness with me, a presence vast and patient, existing in the grey space, as if it had always been there, as if it had been there for longer than I could comprehend, waiting in the silence for something to change. I couldn't see it. There was nothing to see, no form or shape or feature that my eyes could detect, but I could feel it the way you feel someone standing behind you in an empty room. The weight of attention, the pressure of being observed by something that had no eyes but saw everything. The presence became aware of me, and I felt its focus shift in my direction. It didn't have emotions the way humans do, but I sensed something like curiosity emanating from it, something like hunger. And beneath that, buried so deep, it was almost hidden, something that might have been loneliness so profound it made my soul ache in sympathy. I understood, in that moment of contact, what this place was. It wasn't heaven or hell. It wasn't any afterlife that humans had imagined in their religions or philosophies. It was the space between, the gap between life and whatever comes next, and the presence had been trapped there for an eternity, alone, forgotten, waiting for something, anything, to break the endless monotony of its existence. It reached towards me, not physically, because neither of us had physical form in that place, but in some other way I don't have words for. A connection, a bridge, an opening between what it was and what I was. It wanted to know what I was, where I had come from, what existed beyond the grey emptiness that had been its entire existence. It wanted to understand what life meant, what it felt like to have a body and a family and a world full of colour and sound and meaning. The pull was almost irresistible, a longing so intense it felt like my own, a desperate need to connect with something after an eternity of isolation. For a moment, I almost surrendered. I almost opened myself up completely and let the presence pour into the empty spaces inside me, filling me with its vast and ancient awareness. Then something yanked me backward. hard and violent, and the grey space tore apart around me like wet paper ripping down the middle. I gasped back to life on the concrete floor of the third floor. Paramedics were working on me, the defibrillator pads still attached to my bare chest, and someone nearby was crying with relief. Dominic, I think, though I couldn't be sure because my vision was blurred and my ears were ringing. A woman in a blue uniform was shining a light in my eyes, asking me questions I couldn't understand. My heart was beating again. I was alive. 6 minutes. That's what they told me later. My heart had stopped for 6 minutes while Dominic performed CPR and another worker used the site's emergency defibrillator. 6 minutes of clinical death before the paramedics arrived and finally got a rhythm back. Long enough for brain damage, they said. Long enough that I shouldn't have come back at all, let alone come back whole. But I didn't come back whole. Something felt wrong from the very first moment, like I had returned to my body slightly out of alignment with myself. And in the back of my mind, so faint I almost missed it, among the chaos of the emergency room, I felt a pressure that hadn't been there before. The presence, still there, still reaching through the crack I had left behind. I spent 3 days in the cardiac unit while doctors ran every test they could think of. They put me through stress tests and echocardiograms, took vials of blood, and analyzed every heartbeat for signs of what had gone wrong. They found nothing, no blockages, no defects, no arrhythmias, no explanation for why a healthy 41-year-old man would suddenly drop dead on a construction site. They called it a fluke, an anomaly, a medical mystery. They used words like lucky and blessed and second chance, and I nodded along because I didn't know how to tell them the truth. I didn't know how to explain that I had been somewhere during those 6 minutes, that I had encountered something in the darkness, that I could still feel it pressing against the edges of my consciousness. I didn't feel lucky. I felt watched. The night before my discharge, I woke up at 3 a.m. to a room that felt different. The hospital was quiet, just the soft beeping of the heart monitor beside my bed and the distant sound of nurses in the hallway, but I knew immediately that something had changed. There was a pressure in my skull, faint but persistent, like someone standing just behind me, breathing on the back of my neck. I turned on the light and found nothing there. Just the empty chair where Laura had been sitting during visiting hours, the untouched cup of water on the bedside table, the flowers my crew had sent wilting in their vase. The room was exactly as it should have been. But the feeling didn't go away, and when I turned off the light again, trying to convince myself to go back to sleep, I could have sworn the shadows in one corner were darker than they should have been, darker than the absence of light could account for, a pooling of blackness that seemed to have weight and substance. I stared at that corner until the sun came up, afraid to close my eyes, afraid of what I might see if I went back to sleep. Laura and Becca were waiting when I came home. They had made a banner that said, "Welcome home, Dad," and hung it across the front door with streamers and balloons. Becca had baked cookies that were only slightly burned on the bottom, and she presented them to me with the kind of ceremony that only a 12-year-old can manage. They treated me like I was fragile, precious, like I might break if they hugged me too hard or talked too loud. I understood why. They had almost lost me. They were afraid. I tried to act normal, to be grateful for my second chance, to be the husband and father they needed me to be. I ate the cookies and told Becca they were delicious. I held Laura close and promised her I wasn't going anywhere. I smiled and laughed and said all the right things. But underneath it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The pressure in my skull came and went, sometimes faint, sometimes overwhelming. And I started seeing things in my peripheral vision, shapes that vanished when I turned my head, shadows that moved against the light instead of with it, darkness that gathered in corners and doorways, watching, waiting. I began to understand what had happened. When I died, when I went to that grey place between life and death, I had opened a door. And when the paramedics brought me back, when my heart started beating again and I returned to the world of the living, the door didn't close all the way. The presence was still there, on the other side of that door, pressing against the crack I had left behind, learning how to widen it, learning how to push through. Laura noticed something was wrong within the first week. I wasn't sleeping, couldn't sleep, spent too many hours staring at nothing with an expression she couldn't read. She asked me what was going on, whether I was having trouble adjusting, whether I needed to talk to someone professional about what I had experienced. I told her I was fine, just recovering, just processing the trauma of nearly dying. She believed me because she wanted to believe me, because the alternative was too frightening to consider. The dream started around the same time. Every night I found myself back in the grey place, suspended in that endless emptiness, and every night the presence was closer. It had no form I could see, but I could sense its shape now, vast and formless, but somehow concentrated, like a thundercloud that had learned to think. It was learning from me. Every dream, every moment of contact, it absorbed more of who I was. My memories, my experiences, my understanding of what it meant to be alive. It was using what it learned to figure out how to exist in the reality I had come from, how to take form, how to be real. 3 weeks after I died, Becca said something that made my blood run cold. We were eating dinner, the three of us, around the kitchen table like a normal family. Spaghetti and garlic bread and salad, because it was Becca's favorite. She was telling us about her day at school, about the drama with her friends and the test she thought she had failed. Normal 12-year-old concerns. Then she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Who's the man that stands in your shadow, Dad?" she asked. I stopped with my fork halfway to my mouth. The room suddenly felt very cold. Laura laughed nervously and asked Becca what she meant. Becca shrugged and said she kept seeing someone standing behind me, a tall figure made of something darker than dark. "He follows you everywhere," she said. "He's there right now, standing behind your chair." Laura dismissed it as imagination, as a child's way of processing the fear of almost losing her father. "Kids see things that aren't there," she said. "It's perfectly normal. It doesn't mean anything." But I knew Becca wasn't imagining things. Children see things that adults have learned to ignore, truths that we've taught ourselves to overlook because acknowledging them would make life unbearable. My daughter could see what I had been feeling all along. The presence was becoming visible. It was learning to exist here, in our world, and my daughter could see it standing in my shadow. I started researching that night, after Laura and Becca went to bed. I read hundreds of accounts from people who had died and come back, searching desperately for anyone who had experienced something similar. Most of the stories were comforting, tunnels of light, deceased relatives waiting to welcome them, a sense of peace and love that made them unafraid of death. But buried among the peaceful accounts, I found others, scattered stories on obscure forums and archived websites, written by people who had experienced something different, people who came back wrong, who felt followed, who described a grey emptiness and a presence that waited in it. Most of these accounts ended badly. The people who wrote them eventually disappeared, or went mad, or died again under circumstances that were never fully explained. The medical establishment dismissed these cases as brain damage, as hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation, as the fevered imaginings of traumatized minds. But I knew better now. I knew what was waiting in the space between life and death. And I knew that some doors, once opened, don't close on their own. The presence broke through completely 3 weeks after my revival. I woke up in the middle of the night to a bedroom that had become freezing cold, my breath fogged in the air, and when I looked at the windows, I could see frost forming on the inside of the glass, spreading in patterns that almost looked like fingers reaching towards the bed. Laura was still asleep beside me, curled under the blankets, shivering in her sleep. I looked toward the corner of the room, already knowing what I would find, a shape darker than the darkness around it, standing perfectly still. It had no features I could make out, no face, no eyes, nothing that belonged in the human world. But I knew it was looking at me. I could feel its attention like a physical weight pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. The presence had found a way through. The door I had opened was wide open now, and it had stepped into my world. I got out of bed slowly, trying not to wake Laura, trying not to make any sudden movements that might startle it into action. My heart was pounding so hard, I was afraid it might stop again, might send me back to that grey place permanently this time. But I forced myself to stay calm, to breathe, to walk toward the thing in the corner of my bedroom. It didn't move as I approached. It just stood there, existing, a piece of somewhere else that had pushed its way into reality. The cold intensified with every step I took until my teeth were chattering and my fingers had gone completely numb. I stopped a few feet away and waited. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know any prayers that would banish it, didn't have any weapons that could hurt it. All I had was myself, and I wasn't sure that was enough. The presence didn't speak, couldn't speak in any way I would have recognized, but I felt its emotions project directly into my mind, a flood of sensation that overwhelmed my own thoughts. It wasn't malevolent. It wasn't the demon or monster I had been expecting. What I felt from it was loneliness, a loneliness so vast and deep that it made my own worst moments of isolation feel like nothing. This thing had existed in that grey emptiness for an eternity, longer than the universe had existed, longer than time had meaning. It had nothing but itself for company, nothing to see or hear or feel, nothing to break the endless monotony of its existence. And when I had appeared, when I had died and stumbled into its prison, I had been the first new thing it had encountered since before memory began. The first proof that something existed beyond the grey void. The first hope it had felt in an eternity of hopelessness. It wanted what I had: a life, a family, a world full of color and sound and meaning. It wanted to exist the way I existed, to feel what I felt, to be real in a way it had never been allowed to be. I understood then what it wanted from me. It wanted to trade places, to take my life and leave me in the gray space forever. Or it wanted to merge with me, to share my existence, to see through my eyes and feel through my skin for the rest of my natural life. Neither option was acceptable, but standing there in my freezing bedroom with my wife asleep 10 feet away, I didn't know how to refuse. I didn't know if I could refuse. The door I had opened was too wide now, and this thing was already through. So I made a different choice, a desperate one, born of fear and love and the determination to protect my family no matter the cost. I offered it a compromise. I don't know if it understood the words I whispered in that frozen room, but it understood the intent behind them, the meaning I projected with every ounce of will I had left. I would let it stay. I would let it watch through my eyes, experience through my senses, learn what it meant to be alive in a world of light and warmth and love. But it could not take over. It could not harm my family. It could not push me out of my own existence. In return, I would give it the one thing it wanted most. I would give it a window into a world it had been denied for eternity. I would share my life with it for as long as that life lasted. The presence considered my offer. I felt it weighing the options, calculating in whatever way something like it calculated. An eternity alone versus decades of shared existence. Not much of a choice, really, when you put it that way. It accepted. That was 3 weeks ago. I've gone back to work since then, back to my life, trying to act like everything is normal. Laura thinks I'm recovering well. Becca has stopped mentioning the man in my shadow, though I catch her looking sometimes, her eyes tracking something just behind me that I can't see, but can always feel. I'm never alone anymore. The presence is always there, a weight in the back of my mind, watching what I watch, feeling what I feel. Sometimes its emotions bleed into my own, and I feel that ancient loneliness, like it belongs to me. Sometimes I close my eyes and catch glimpses of the grey place, still there, still waiting on the other side of a door that can never be closed. We exist in an uneasy coexistence now, the presence and I. It keeps its promise not to harm my family, not to try to take over completely. I keep my promise to share my life with it, to show it what existence means in a world full of light and color and people who love each other. I don't know how long this arrangement will last. I don't know what happens when I die again, for real this time. Maybe the presence will let me go, satisfied with what it's experienced. Maybe it will drag me back to the grey place and keep me there forever, finally having company in its eternal prison. I try not to think about that. I try to focus on the life I have, the wife I love, the daughter who sees things the rest of us have forgotten how to see. Every day is borrowed time now, but maybe it always was. Maybe death was always closer than any of us wanted to believe. I'm writing this as a warning to anyone who might experience what I experienced. Death is not what we think it is. The space between life and whatever comes after is not empty. Things wait there, forgotten things, lonely things, things that are desperate to find a way back to a world that has substance and meaning. If you die and return, pay attention to what follows you back. Pay attention to the shadows that move wrong, the cold spots that appear without explanation, the feeling of being watched when you're certain you're alone. Because the door swings both ways, and something might be waiting for its chance to walk through. I opened that door 6 weeks ago. I can't close it now. And every night, when the house is dark and my family is asleep, I sit in the living room and feel the presence beside me, patient and eternal, watching through my eyes as I watch the shadows gather in the corners. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. I learned that the hard way. And whatever time I have left, I'll spend it knowing that I'm never truly alone.